Today we're going to learn Siman Shin Chavav. I'm actually not going to read most of it inside, but the topic is going to be Issah Lechalek. It's something that somewhat confusing, but we have a bunch of practical applications to it of where shouldn't apply. So before we get to the actual din, I'm going to give a drop of an introduction. The introduction is really going to be the first halacha in the siman, and then we'll get to the second halacha in the siman, some of the basic details of these dinim. It's not, as you'll hear, it's not a coincidence that halacha aleph is before halacha beis. Halacha beis is where it says the din of Issah Lechalek. Halacha aleph, it's not by coincidence that it's right before, even though at first glance you wouldn't see a connection. Okay, so we're in Siman Shin Chavav. Shin Chav Dal and Shin Chav Hey, the two siman beforehand, told us that there are ways that you could be mitzaref different batters together to make a shir challah. Okay? Sometimes I have my one batter didn't have a shir challah, but I have a number of I keep saying batter. I'm sorry. A number of those that have a shir challah. I don't know why I say that. A number of those that have a shir challah. So in Shin Chav Dal and Shin Chav Hey, we found out that there are ways they can come together before baking, after baking, all different ways they can come together. So we had mentioned once beforehand, but it's really in our din that if the only time you can combine different doughs together is assuming that the people don't mind that they mix with one another. There have to be two doughs that the people don't care if they would mix with each other. It goes so far that the Rama says in Halacha Aleph, he says that if you have two Issahs, that one, they're exactly identical, except that one is spiced and one is not. One is spicy, the other one is not. So you wouldn't want them to mix, presumably because the spicy one is going to ruin the taste of a plainer one. Then that's not tziruf. Okay, so all the rules we had of tziruf, you had the right minim, all kinds of things that we had to have, how you get them next to each other and touching each other, all kinds of rules. All, if the people don't, if you wouldn't want the two things to mix together, there's not a tziruf. That stops tziruf from happening. Okay, now, the Mechaber speaks out that as a rule, if it's one person with two identical doughs, then he wouldn't mind if they mix with each other. I mean, two batches of the same kind of chocolate chip cookies, I don't care if they mix with each other, it's the same stuff. And as a rule, if it's two people, then they would be makbid. They wouldn't want to mix it, not because of the taste, but because this is mine, this is yours. People wouldn't want them to mix with each other. So, as a rule, one person is not makbid when it's the same recipe, and two people are makbid. But the Shulchan says it's lav dafka. Okay, so in the Poskim, when they use the words one person or two people, those are like code words. They don't mean one person and two people. It's a code word to say one person means the people are not makbid. You're not makbid if the two things will mix with each other, and two people is a code word for saying they are makbid for them mixing one another. It doesn't have to be one person or two people. Those are just code words that one person usually doesn't care, and two people usually do care, but who had them the other way around. Also, if one person would be makbid and two people would be not makbid, it would be the same also. Okay, that's halacha aleph. Okay. And that's, we're going to need to know that piece of information for when we talk about our real topic, which is Issah Lechalek. If you have a dough that's going to be split up between people. Okay, now, halacha beis is going to be like this. That's the din of Issah Lechalek, and that is, if you have a dough, and that dough is going to be split up, it will be permanently split up before it gets baked, to the point that the divided pieces are going to have each are going to have less than a shir challah. You're not muchayt in mafresh challah. Okay, but let me say that in different words to bring out three main points of what I just said, and that is like this: if a person has this big dough and it has the shir challah in it, and the first point is like this. When we say it's going to be divided up, that it doesn't need to have that it doesn't have a chiv of Hafrashas challah, that's only if it gets divided up before it's baked. If the division is going to happen after it gets baked, that's not Issah Lechalek. Okay, that's why the Mechaber says. I'm skipping the beginning words. If you're going to split it up while it's dough, then it's pater. Okay, so the first condition is the chalukah, the separation has to happen when it's in the dough form before it's baked. So, for example, if a person makes makes a big batch of chocolate cake, and they make a dozen little cakes together for shachmanis, okay, so they're going to divide it up to give it to different people after it's baked. That doesn't make a difference. It only makes a difference if it's going to be broken up before it's baked. If it's going to be broken up, if I'm going to give it to a dozen different people afterwards, after it's baked, that doesn't make a difference. It only makes a difference if the division happens when it's batzik, before it gets baked.
So this is a patur the rest, right?
This is a patur It's a good question, but it's right, sir. It's just going to be there. I'm going to get to you walked in first of all, wait, but also I'm going to talk about the source in a second. No, so I'm going to explain all that in a second. First, I'm just going to give you we really missed the first din also. Okay, second thing is, the pieces that you divide have to be each less than a shechala. Okay? The simple understanding is that the din of Issah Surah Lechalek is that it had a shir challah, and each piece has less than a shir challah, and therefore, somehow, that ruins it, because they have less than shir challah. Okay? The simple understanding is that it's a halacha in shir challah. Since it was mechulak, it doesn't have the shir challah. Okay? I say that that's a simple understanding. We probably won't have time, but if we did, I'll come back to it. There's a Rama, it's coming up at dinner later on. There's a reply about it. It may not be so partial. It may not be the way we think it is. Okay, but we work with the assumption that it doesn't have a shir challah. But if the pieces have a bigger challah, let's say I made a batch that was 50 pounds of dough, 50 pounds of flour, and then I broke it up into 10 pieces, and each one has 5 pounds. That's not Issah Surah Lechalek. Each piece that was divided up has a shir challah. Okay, and the third rule is the third rule that I was making a point of is. It's got to be that it will for sure be mechulak after it's baked. It's got to be that it will definitely get divided up. If it's even a chance that it will be together after it's baked, that's pater. That's still chayiv in Hafrashas challah. Okay, and that comes down from the first part of the mechaber, who says nachtem she'as Issah la'sois sa'ar. A nachtem, a baker, made a dough in order to make it into sourdough for a bunch of people. Challah. You're going to divide it up. No one wants, 5 pounds of sourdough. He's going to divide it up to a lot of people. Chayeves b'challah. That dough is chayev b'challah. Even though he's going to divide it up before it's baked, you use sourdough when it's raw. Even though he's going to divide it up before it's baked, it's parted. Why? It's chayev shem lo timacher yasenu pas. If it won't get sold, he won't find customers. He'll bake as a loaf of bread. I mean, sourdough starts off as the same dough as bread, so he'll make it into bread. So, therefore, it's possible, it's not very likely, but it's possible it's not going to get sold. Therefore, that thing is chayiv and challah. It's not considered Issah Surah Lechalek. You only have Surah Lechalek if it will, for sure, stay in the separated form.
Bakers sold dough.
Bakers sold sourdough. Yeah, sourdough. Sourdough. Well, it's not really dough, it's sourdough, okay? It's like yeast, right? It's like yeast. People had no way to get yeast, so it's like selling yeast. Okay, so now, in order to understand where to apply this din of Issah Surah Lechalek, I'm going to do exactly as Rabbi Yes wanted me to do, which is, first we're going to talk about what the makar is. When I'm going to tell you about why I think the makar is, I didn't see person speaking about it, I'll tell you what I think anyhow. And then we're going to try to understand the svara, the logic, why should it be like that? And then once we do that, we'll understand how to apply it to different cases. Okay? So, the first thing we're going to talk about is what the makar is. Okay? Now, we could imagine that if you would say that if two people have dough and you want to be mitzaref it, maybe you would say that if the people don't want it to come together, like in halachah, if they don't want it to come together, they can't be a tziruf. We can imagine something like that. Do you think that Surah Lechalek means that they don't plan on keeping it together? That tziruf means joining together. So you could imagine if you would say, you'd imagine that if the din was, if we're talking about two different people, we'd say it's not considered mitzurah because they don't want it to be mitzurah, sort of like halachah. But that's not the din we're saying. We're saying the din is, I made the whole dough, and I'm going to split it up later on, so why should we care? It doesn't need, so to speak, tziruf. It's the dough is the dough. I made one big batch of dough. It was 5 pounds of flour. Why am I not chayiv challah? Because I'm planning on splitting it up before I bake it. Why should that make a difference? Okay. So, it seemed to me that our din is an extension of a din that we saw in Shin Chafei. Okay? We mentioned Shin Chafei is a din of tziruf sal. Tziruf sal means that if the two doughs are separate, and neither of them has a shir challah, but you put them together into the same basket. Now, they don't have to have neshicha. You're touching each other in the same basket, in the same container. You could have tziruf sal, and they become mature into one shir. We said then that the din is not only can you have tziruf sal when it's in a dough form, you can even have tziruf sal when it's in a baked form also. Okay, which we said was very surprising. Why should you have tziruf sal when something's baked? The chiyuv of challah is when you make the dough. The chiyuv of challah is not when you bake it. So when it was dough, it was not a shir challah. Why should it be chayiv? And the answer is, the Rambam says, the answer is because the pasuk says, ba'achochem v'hoya ba'achochem milechem haaretz. The Torah says you should be mafresh challah when you eat milechem haaretz. Why does the Torah say you should be mafresh challah when you have lechem? So we learn many, many din from this pasuk of milechem. It describes it as being lechem. Why do we care if it's lechem? Really, you chayav challah before it's lechem. And we learn from there is that the shir challah has to. The shir, you could even get a shir challah in the lechem form. Not only could you have a shir challah when it's in the dough form, not only when it's in arisay sechem, but even when it's in the lechem form, you could also have a shir challah. So therefore, if the tziruf happens after, when it's in the lechem form, that's also good enough. That's what the Rambam says. That's the makar, that there's such a good tziruf sal even after it's lechem. So I thought.
Who's the makar though in to me.
Yeah, that's what I'm. No, okay, sorry. That tziruf sal works even on lechem. That's a gemara. That's good. But what's
I mean the Lechalek is.
That Asur Lechalek? Mishnayos. I did not see. Maybe they do. I couldn't find someone who says Makar. Right? I'm sure there is. I'm explaining. So at the end of one of the what I said, and then you could tell. I told you know where it came from. The end of what I'm saying is, and therefore, just like the Rambam says, that the shir challah you could be mitzaref when it's in the lechem form. We learn from the hoya ba'achochem milechem aret. So too, I thought you could say the opposite. That in sometimes, if it doesn't hold on to its shir challah till it gets to the lechem form, then it also doesn't have a shir challah. Just like we say lechumra that it could be mitzurah. Well, I don't know what you call it. Lechumra that it can be mitzurah even till the point where it's lechem. So too we say lekula that if it's not mitzurah till the lechem form, it's not mitzurah. Then we learn from lechem that there's a part of the shir challah has to happen even in the lechem form, not just the dough. Okay, that's what I did not. This is my understanding. I did not see anyone saying. Maybe I'm sure someone was saying. I didn't find anybody.
Like the Rashi Mishnah goes into.
I didn't see. Maybe I looked around. I don't know if I looked every place. Obviously, I didn't because you'll find it over Shabbos. But I didn't find anybody who says this is my understanding of what the makar.
It makes perfect sense.
Okay, now my shot is of course going to feed into what I'm going to say in a minute, but that's what my understanding. Okay. Now, but there's a much more serious question. This question is just like, what's the makar for it? Okay, but what's the now I don't want to ask you what the svara is for them. I want to ask you is, if the din is true that Issah Lechalek, if a dough will not have a shir challah all the way till the baking, you're not chayiv. That's what I told you. Then a whole pile of places can ask the exact same question. They say, really? Then we're never chayiv in challah. Does anybody take? Except when you go to a chassan, does anybody take 5 pounds of flour and make a bread out of it, or one loaf of bread out of it? If the din is, it has to not be mechulik until the time that you bake it. Well, if I take 5 pounds of flour and I make 5 challahs out of it, each loaf only has 1 pound in it. So it was mechulik. It didn't hold on to the shir challah till the time it was baked.
You're keeping it for yourself.
What does it keep yourself? It doesn't say. It says Issah. What? Issah Lechalek b'batzek petura. No. Lochat means to divide into pieces.
It's not called divide. It's divided in a way that the halacha.
I'm going to come to such an answer. I didn't make up this question. It's the Vush and the Shach and the Bach and the Prisha and the Gra. You're going to hear a whole pile of people who ask this question. They say, you never chayav Lechalek. Lechalek means you divide up into different loaves. Okay, so I take this 5 pound dough and I make a bunch of 2 pound rise. Okay, well every 2 pound rise, between 2.5 and 5 pounds, depending on what the shear. I make a bunch of 2 pound rise out of it. Okay, every 2 pound rise, not chayav Lechalek. Every one is less than a shear. So I was mechalik this dough into a bunch of into pieces. Nobody ever makes. Yeah, nobody ever makes a dough that's that big. Everybody answers kasha. Yeah, it's a whole bunch of achronim speak it out. It's all. You want to? I can't even see this. And how could it be? He said, I'm reading the right words here. I'm reading the quote. Okay, we'll read it inside afterwards. Okay, you'll have to believe me. A whole pile of Harim answers kasha. They say, so when is the guy ever chayav in Hafrashas Challah? It'll never happen. Now the Gra is a twist to it. Okay? Everyone just says, hey, when we have the Hafrashas Challah, the Gra has a very specific case. Very interesting. From Chalas Toida and Rikike Nazir, that are chayav. The Mishnah says the chayav in Hafrashas Challah, and they are divided into pieces. So he says, and so you see that even if it's divided, you still chayav in Hafrashas Challah. He has a right that it's true. Everybody else, he gets to himself also, is that Lamaisa, we all do it, we all Hafrashas Challah, but he actually has a specific case in Chazal that it says you chayav in Challah, that according to what seemed would be the rules, you're not chayav in Challah. Okay, so The Achronim have a number of answers to Kasha. The Pesach Tshuva brings here a number of answers from Achronim to the Kasha. I'm only going to mention one of them in passing, but that's not really what I want to say. I'm going to mention it because later we'll tell the Lechalek. Okay? One of the answers that people are most famously know about is brought here in the Pesach Tshuva. And that is, it depends if you're going to keep if one person's going to keep it or many people are going to have it. Okay, and that's what it depends on. If one person's going to have it, then it's considered not Lechalek. And if it's going to be many people are going to own it, then it's actually Lechalek. Okay, and the question on that is, the Gra mentions such a pshat. He says such a pshat. He asks himself. He says that there's a problem because when you were here in Halacha Aleph we saw that there is no such thing as a difference in din between one person and many people. There is such a word that place can use, one person and many people. But the word one person and many people, it's really a code word. One person means is the person doesn't care if they're mixed together, and two people means is the person does care if they're mixed together. But there's no difference between one person and two people. That's what Muhammad said in Halacha Aleph. So what does this mean that we're saying that over here, if it's going to be one person or two people, why should that make a difference? So the answer that made sense. The Tzlach says, and the Chazon Ish say, they both say, come out the same thing. They say like this. They say, this is what you were hinting at. And it's an extension of what these places are saying in Pesach Tshuva. That is like this. We know that if you have two doughs, and they touch each other in a way it's called Neshicha, we have this in Shin Chaf Dalet, they touch each other so well that one would pull apart a piece from the other one, then they're mitzurv. That's one way to make tzirv. We saw in Shin Chaf Hey that if they're in the same container, we have tzirv sal, they can be mitzurv also. We saw in our din that the din of Asur Lechalek is only true when it will for sure stay mechulak. If there's a chance that it will come back together, then the din is that's not considered Issah Asur Lechalek. So if we put all those three pieces together, it comes out the following. If I make a dough, and let's say I make 5 challahs out of my bag. I have a 5-pound challah, I make 5 1-pound challahs out of it. A 5-pound dough, I make 5 1-pound challahs out of it. It's not asur l'chalik because it's not 100% that this thing will stay mechulak even after it's baked. Why? Because the din of neshicha while it's baking, the din of tzir sal even after it's baking means it's very possible that this dough is going to end up being not mechulak, it'll be mitzurah after the baking also. If I take all 5 challahs and I stick them into a bag together, I just made a tzir. If I have them while they're baking, they touch each other in a way that they stick to each other. Like you ever seen the bakery? They pull the challahs apart from each other. They had a neshicha to them. Then all those things are going to make it that they are mitzurah even after they're baked. So when we say that Issah Asur Lechalek is potter, and the din is it's only potter if it'll for sure stay mechulak. Well, when a person bakes, in a normal person baking, when they make many loaves out of the same thing, they're not going to stay separate when they're baked. They might stay baked. They probably will stay separate when they're baked, but they're not for sure. Maybe yes and maybe not. So therefore, since there's a possibility that they will be mitzurah after they're baked, therefore it's not Issah Asur Lechalek. It's like a nachman. There's a chance that even after it's baked, it'll still have a shir challah. In one, it'll be mitzurah into a shir challah even after it's baked, and that's why it's potter. That's what it's called. So, on the second one, you have pure Issah Asur Lechalek, but it comes out that Issah Asur Lechalek. So this is a variation of what the Pesach Tshuva brings from people, but it's a variation that says the word one person and two people doesn't really mean one person and two people. It means makbid and eina makbid and makbid. So if I have two things together, let's say I take a batch of dough and I turn it into 5 2-pound rise, 5 1-pound challahs. I don't care if they would mix with each other. They're all the same dough. From as far as I'm concerned, it's okay if they mix together. And it's possible that they will mix together. They will have a halachic tziruf even after they're baked, and therefore the chayim challah. So.
The Chayim said it?
Yeah, I just. It's chazan.
No, I'm saying the Chayim that say the chilek of one person or two people.
No, some of them don't. No, but you missed. In Al Aleph, the Shulchan said this. He said, "There's no such thing as one person and two people. In din, there's no such thing as one person."
All those people that said the answer knew the Shulchan, they still didn't say the chilek.
Okay, so
Who would you say?
Chazanish and the Nagid.
And they don't Because it doesn't write it up. He's arguing with everybody else. Well, he's arguing with other
So it could
I don't know. I didn't see it.
So it could be that it's an interpretation of some of them. Some of them say the Ferush that they mean mamish one person and two people. Some of them it's just an interpretation. Maybe what they meant was when they said one person, two person is this because in din one person and two person those are code words. They don't really mean anything. There's no such thing as one person, two people. Like the din is later. Issah there's no such difference as one person and two people. It's okay. Doesn't make a difference. There's no difference. Okay. So like this. If I make sa'ar for people in a way that I know for sure that it's going to be mechulek. Okay? No, it's not like the nachtan who when he makes it, he might not sell them, he might recombine them. The person made it with, a bunch of people got together or they had customers from before, and they know for sure not to be mechulek. So then, that dough is never going to have tir after it's baked, because I'm going to give me and each of my neighbors are going to have one. So there's no way in the foreseeable future that that you use the sourdough before you bake it, that those breads are going to come back here to be mature. So that's part of it. That's easy.
You can change your mind. There's not many for sure in this world.
What do you make it? Yeah, I can't say
is there any chance?
So any chance is been it's a radical way to say it. You know what I mean? If there'll be a hurricane and we'll all get into the same house together and we'll pool our food, then it's kind of serious. But
I made it in my house. Okay, I'm keeping it myself.
No. So that's in Shulchan here. That if a person made it in a way that it's going to be given out to people, for sure it's going to be given out.
For sure. What does that mean?
So.
Okay, you don't have to be for sure. You can make a shibboleth and say potato.
I made 5 challahs for myself. I'm not planning on doing a shikha. I'm not planning on putting them in the same bag.
No, it's not a matter of planning. It's that when you put them into the oven, that's a reasonable thing that will happen. It's possible that you'll have in the shikha oven.
I don't like it. I don't want my challahs.
And neither does the baker want to recombine all his doughs and make it into a bread. He doesn't want to.
The baker knows that eventually.
It could happen. So in your house, it never happens that the challahs touch each other in the oven. It never happens. You care? No,
of course I care. I don't want my challahs stuck together. I don't want them all in the same
bag. Yeah, but you might put them in the same bag.
Why do I put challahs in the same bag?
Okay.
You're not busy trying when you make challahs in the oven. You're not busy trying to make sure there's no syrup.
Okay, so the Chazanish sticks in. I believe that's what he says. I'll say, let's say a person makes the challahs in a pan. Doesn't be challahs. It could be a loaf of bread also. Okay, they make it in a pan. Okay, and they make it in the pan in a way that it doesn't stick out of the pan. Okay, so there's no way that one could touch the other one in the oven. Okay, there's no way they could touch each other. Okay? And then when they come out of the oven, they're also if they keep them in the pan or something like that in a way there's not going to be a tziruf, then that's Issah Lechalek.
Put it in a bag.
So if it's done in a way that it'll never be mature, that's Issah Lechalek. I got it already. Okay. Second, he says what happens if I cover them in different ways. What I mean is like this. Okay, think of it like this. Bubby makes challahs for all of her married children. Okay, every Thursday night, every Friday morning, she makes challahs for all of her married children. Okay, and on some of the challahs she puts egg. On lots of the challahs she puts egg and sesame. But some of them she doesn't because in one of the families the kids are allergic to eggs or is allergic to sesame. Okay, so in that case, she doesn't want them to mix with each other because she doesn't want the sesame on the not sesame one because that kid's allergic. Okay, that family can't have that. Okay, so if she does it like that, then it's Issah Lechalek. That's going to be divided up in a way that she doesn't want them and she will make sure that there's no tziruf later on. That's mechulek, assuming each one has less than a shir challah. But if she makes a dozen challahs that are all equal, and there's no difference in one and the other one, and to her, the fact that she's going to divide to many people is still considered Issah Lechalek. If we make
it's a challah?
It's not a shul chal, and she's chayim of Hafrashas chal. If
she's taking it out when it's done.
No, when she's sending a chal, she bakes chal and she sends home made challahs to each family.
And she made it on das to send it to 12 people.
Correct.
That's a shul chal.
Okay, so if kid goes to camp and the mower makes a big batch of dough that has a shir chal, and gives each kid a piece to shape into their own chal. Okay, every kid goes and makes their own shape, what it is. So if the kid takes it home as dough, so the mechaber says, if you take it home, Lechalek b'patzik, you pater. If each kid's going to take home their own little challah as dough and bring it home, that's pater. What happens if they're going to bake it in camp? They're going to keep it there. Each kid shapes their own challah, and then they bake it in camp. So now it depends. Usually, I would guess that usually the kids are not makbid one on the other one, that one should care, mine gets a little bit of his, or he gets some mine. In most cases, I would think the kid would be makbid. Then it would not be Azul Lechalek. If the kid does care, if they do care, because for whatever reason, then it's not Azul Lechalek. What happens if I take a batch of dough and I make a big batch of dough, but there's just one person eating by themselves. So what they do is they make this big batch of chayv and challah, and each week they bake 3 buklas, okay, or 5 for themselves, and the rest they put into the freezer as dough. Okay, they don't put it into the freezer baked. They don't bake it and then freeze it baked. They bake it. They put it in the freezer already. They shape the challahs and they put them into the freezer dough, and then every week they pull them out. What's it do in that case? So that person, there's no way that these are going to ever be mitzurah. Okay, he took 3 over here and 3 every week. He takes 3, or half the batter for this week, half is for next week. So half the dough, I keep saying batter, half is for this week, half is for next week. So that's a sort of Lechalek the batzek. Okay, it's never going to come. There's no way that it can come together when it's baked. The guy's potter. What happens if he owns a company? Okay, like I don't know if it's still the brand they still use, Kinneret Chalas. Okay, so that person, he makes them dough, and each one that he makes is less than a shir challah, and he's going to send it to many people as dough. So to me, I thought that maybe is like the case of the Nachten, that it's possible. He has no way of knowing who's going to buy them together. Okay, so if somebody will buy in 3 of them together that came from the same batch and be chayv challah, it would seem that he should be chayv challah. I'm not sure, but it seemed like that was the case of Nachten, that it's possible it'll come back together and the guy will have a shir challah. Okay, I'm going to stop it.